On today's video, I'm going to share my custom Framemeister profiles for the PC-Engine and TurboGrafx-16. However, I'm going to be using the dbGrafx Booster TTP from DB Electronics, which plugs into the extension port found on most of these systems. However, this won't work if you have a CD add-on or a system without an ext port, so this mod-free solution certainly isn't for everyone. In addition to adding composite video and S-video outputs, the dbGrafx Booster TTP also adds a Sega Genesis multi-AV port, giving access to true RGB video using Genesis AV cables. Today I'm going to be using the Sega Genesis version of the HD Retrovision Component Cable. I'll share traditional RGB SCART settings in a future video. While the original intent of the HD Retrovision Component Cables was to allow a superior retro gaming experience on a modern flat panel television, I thought it would be interesting to test them using the Framemeister. There could be reasons you might have an HD Retrovision Component Cable rather than a more traditional RGB SCART cable as well, such as purchasing the Framemeister after the HD Retrovision cable whet your appetite for RGB video, and component video switches are still relatively cheap and more accessible than SCART video switches, at least here in North America. Of course, the Framemeister does not have a component video input, so you'll need a D-terminal to component adapter. You'll also want to turn the brightness switch down on the HD Retrovision cable itself. Before we get started, let me get a few things out of the way. First, as of this video, the most recent version of the Framemeister firmware is 2.03a, so I'm going to assume you are using this firmware. Next, you should reset all of your settings by going to Data Reset from the Framemeister menu. This should reset everything to their default values, but won't change any of your previously saved profiles. Next, I'm going to offer 3 different profiles, beginning with 2 1080p profiles and then a 720p profile. Now, I do have some personal preferences, including a 1:1 pixel ratio over a 4:3 aspect ratio. I also prefer integer scaling, which means some compromises will be made. First up is a perfect 5x scale. This will crop off the top and bottom of the game image, but will give us perfectly even pixels. So with that, here are my 1080p 5x settings. Next up is a perfect 4x scale. Here, all 240 horizontal rows or vertical resolution are visible, which may be desirable for some games. The compromise here is a black border on the top and bottom of the screen, again in exchange for perfectly even pixels. So with that, here are my 1080p 4x settings. Last, let's move on to my 720p profile. This may be useful if your television only supports 720p resolutions, if you're like me and can only capture 60 frames per second video at 720p, and of course, 720p is preferable if you're a scanline aficionado. Again, these settings will give you a perfect 1:1 pixel ratio instead of a 4:3 aspect ratio. These settings also offer a perfect 3x scale for maximum sharpness. So with that, here are the 720p settings that I use. One of the Framemeister's strong points are its handling of 240p content, even over component, and these settings should give you a near emulation experience on the big screen.